we're doing a hybrid style, so we have quite a few in the room as well. So hopefully the technology works okay. But thank you to Abigail, and obviously good morning to everyone. You're all very, very welcome. First, a special thanks to our speakers for taking time to travel to London to speak with us, and to all of those here. Thank you for taking time from your busy schedules to join us today on a topic that I think we can all agree is becoming more and more concerning as time goes on. If you're here, you're likely aware of the issues Clause 9 raises. And before I hand it over to our speakers, I wanted to provide a brief overview of how their stories specifically relate to Clause 9 of the Public Order Bill, which, as you likely know, seeks to mandate buffer zones around abortion clinics nationwide. Both our speakers have been impacted directly, very significantly indirectly, by similar buffer zones that were established as public spaces protection orders, and their stories highlight the dangers inherent in Clause 9 as it stands. Furthermore, since scheduling this event, there has been yet another affront to freedom of thought, as evidenced by the case of Adam Smith Connor, an army veteran who is fighting a £100 fine for praying within another buffer zone established by PSPO in Bournemouth. Indeed, the fine, the arrest of Isabel for allegedly praying silently outside a closed abortion clinic within a PSPO, and Clare's experience suggests that these laws, and likely Clause 9, unless amended, can and will grossly intrude on civil liberties, preventing women in crisis pregnancy from receiving often wanted assistance and criminalising thought crimes. Needless to say, these developments are particularly concerning and timely, with the report stage for the Public Order Bill scheduled on the 30th of January for the House of Lords. More information on Clause 9 can be found in the supplementary information that you'll receive at the conclusion of the event. But in short, as these cases show how this law might be applied to prevent stories like theirs happening across the country, Clause 9 must be amended to ensure individuals are not criminalised for peaceful activities like offers of support or indeed silent prayer. We have some very resilient speakers today, and first and foremost, Clare Carberry from Be Here For Me, a mother of 6. Wow. She just checked in with 2 of her daughters. So definitely mummy duties are still ongoing. A mother of 6 and a trained midwife, Clare had a personal experience that became aware of women in crisis who were having abortions that they didn't want. And so she began to think how she could help, including working with other mothers opposed to the ban on offering assistance to women in crisis pregnancy outside abortion centres. The campaign group came to be known as Be Here For Me. Hundreds of women and babies have benefited from the kind of assistance which would be prohibited nationwide if this law is passed. And then Isabel Vaughan-Spruce will share her experience, and certainly Isabel has been cast into the media quite publicly in recent days, and she will share her experience of being arrested for silently praying outside a closed abortion clinic. Her case has attracted wide interest, particularly given the civil liberties concerns it raises. So with that, I will hand over to Clare. You're very welcome, and she has Fermanagh roots, and we do have a couple of Fermanagh LAs on the call, so it's really good to have you here, and we will allow you to tell your story.
Well, thank you very much, Carla, for that great introduction. I think you've sort of covered most of that very well, and so I'm going to just talk for a few moments about who we are and how we came to be, how our organisation Be Here For Me came to be, and the impact that it's had upon us and upon the women that we would seek to assist. And before I go on, I also want to say that I feel in many ways quite inadequate to be here representing this organisation, because I'm aware that there are people who are people of extraordinary heroism and courage that are not here today, and that I represent just a tiny sort of a fraction, because I helped to set up this group around my kitchen table. But I don't want to be guilty of, I think there's an American word, stealing valor, and I don't want to be guilty of stealing the valor of any other pro-lifers, because I have met the most incredible sacrificial people, and my role is really not to be sort of not to be sort of overshadowing anything that they are doing, which is really quite extraordinary. So we'll Be Here For Me. This is the group that we set up in 2017, 2018, literally around my kitchen table. We were having meetings every week when we saw that there were moves afoot to limit the offers of assistance that we were giving outside an abortion clinic in Ealing, on Mattock Lane in Ealing. I live in the borough of Ealing, I live in Acton. And these became quite aggressive. And what had been a very, very quiet and gentle, peaceful initiative suddenly became a kind of protest circus when a lot of pro-choicers arrived, and they created the impression of this sort of a circus outside the clinic. It became really unpleasant. So we could see that they were making very, very quick, very swift inroads and an impact there, creating the impression of unpleasant goings on outside the clinic. And so I'm also going to talk at some point about at the end about the impact that the end of that outreach has had on us and on a number of women. So our website, by the way, is www.behereforme.org, and I would really encourage you to go and have a look, because there's videos. There are lots and lots and lots of videos of women there talking about their testimonies, about their stories of how they've been have had the assistance that they've received. So who are we and how do we operate? So I'm a volunteer. There's volunteers and counsellors that attend outside these clinics. So the counsellors would be people who would have had some training to talk to women and offer them help. This would be a very, very minimal approach. It would be an offer of a leaflet. That would be it. There's no engagement unless the women themselves invite an engagement. But that's not been my role. My role has really been to, as a supportive role and praying at some distance, at some remove. That's something that I can no longer do. The presence outside the Ealing Clinic has been there for nearly 2 decades now. Very, very quiet, very, very low key. There were no complaints, but we got it on record. The police have confirmed that there've been no arrests, no cautions, nothing. There's been no hint of any bad behaviour there. There have been 600 women who have been helped to make a choice that they wanted to keep their babies, because many of these women we know are having abortions that they don't want. But they're having abortions because they don't have any other choice. So it's particularly ironic. The pro-choice narrative is particularly ironic in the context of those women who are saying, I have got no choice. So 600 women there in Ealing have been helped, but overall 4,000 have been helped by the Good Counsel Network to keep their children. We've tried to get our MP in Ealing to meet with these women. Before the buffer zone started, I made several approaches to Rupa Huck, but none of them, she didn't respond to any of them. And in fact, I was blocked on Twitter, maybe because I was just a bit too persistent. That was my answer, actually, just to the block. I think that it might be useful if I could tell you a little bit about how I came to be involved in this, because I understand that it's very controversial and I had to overcome a lot of my own disquiet about, there's lots of ways to help people. We don't have to be standing outside an abortion clinic, and it is a very, very it's controversial, and I understand why it's controversial. I'm a midwife. I've looked after women and children, have been my kind of, and I've got 6 children, and, you know, that's my bag, women and children, that's been my area of interest. And if you ask any midwife about their role in respect of caring for women, they'll always say that the autonomy of the woman is prime, that it's our most important kind of focus is to the dignity and the autonomy of that woman. So why would somebody like me, and I really I have really embraced this philosophy, this has very much informed my work. I found myself pregnant back in 2007. I was expecting twins. I already had 4 sons and I was expecting twins. And I'm not somebody who had ever experienced depression and anxiety before. And I think it was probably a hormonal thing going on, but at the time it seemed real, that it seemed that I was seeing life truly as it truly was, and I didn't recognize in myself what was actually going on. In fact, a dear friend of mine towards the very end of my pregnancy did actually say that she wanted to make a psychiatric referral, and I agreed, but by the time my appointment with the psychiatrist rolled around, I'd already delivered, and one of my twins had been stillborn. So that was, and I was actually no longer, in this sort of fog of depression. I'd sort of moved into another kind of mental state altogether. But I had a very, very strong sense of being unable to cope, and I was nonetheless surrounded by incredibly supportive people. I've got a very supportive husband. I've got very supportive friends. I'm a midwife. My midwife friends were supportive of me, and they were all kind of giving me very positive can-do messages. One person I remember, when I told her that I was expecting twins, she wasn't a dear friend as such, but she was an acquaintance, and she gasped and she said I would throw myself under a train. Mm-hmm. And when this has really stuck with me, because somebody else, when I was expressing my anxieties about being unable to cope, she said, they're only babies, they're not going to jump up and bite you. And those 2 comments, they were just sort of both off the cuff, but the impact was so kind of profound on me, because my mental state was so fragile that I could feel myself being tossed whichever way, whoever I was talking to, I would kind of take on their view, their opinion of my situation. And I remember really hanging on to my dear friend who'd said, they're only babies, they're not going to jump up and bite you. I thought, yes, why am I so sort of in such a lather of anxiety about this? Anyway, so very unfortunately, my little girl Olivia died just before she was born. And I ended up with just one of my twins, and I was completely overwhelmed with the most enormous feelings of regret, and remembering things that I'd said, negative things that I'd said about the babies, not wanting to have twins. I mean, just awful. I was excoriated with guilt over that. Very, very difficult to roll out the red carpet for one baby and be grieving another. And so one night I Googled, and I'm not quite sure why, but I Googled this. I tapped these words into Google as I was talking to a person, and I said, I just want my baby back. And to my incredible surprise, what I got was just a mountain of grieving women who'd had abortions. Now, up until that point, I had totally been marinating in this cultural idea that women who have abortions are making a choice in this country, and that women who attend clinics are making a free choice. And even though it might be an unpleasant choice or one that I don't care for, I wouldn't want to interfere with that. I suddenly saw a whole silent community of women who'd made this choice in a moment of panic and were now grieving. And I was really identifying with them, because I thought, much as it was awful for me, regretting the things that I'd said, I felt that I could legitimately receive sympathy from my friends, whereas these women could not. They were pouring their hearts out anonymously on the internet. Amongst these stories was the story of an artist called Emma Beck, who had an abortion in September 2006, so exactly a year before I lost Olivia. And she had found herself pregnant with twins. She was unsupported by her boyfriend. He left her and he wanted her to end the pregnancy. Her friends encouraged her to do likewise. They said, you can't cope with a twin pregnancy, you're on your own. It seemed that her entire social environment, none of them were saying they're only babies, they're not going to jump up and bite you. She didn't have anybody like that in her life, and she went ahead and had the abortion. In February 2007, when just around the time that I was discovering that I was pregnant, Emma Beck hanged herself. And I read online her suicide notes, and she said, living is hell for me. I should never have had an abortion. I see now I would have been a good mum. I was frightened. Now it's too late. I want to be with my babies. They need me now, and no one else does. So this opened for me, this opened the floodgates. And for the first time since I'd lost Olivia, I found myself crying. It's sometimes easier to cry for somebody else than it is to cry for yourself. Because when we've had, you know, if you've had powerful losses, you might relate to this. It's too much. Crying is like, it's quite a nice release. A powerful loss is quite hard to sort of actually engage with. And so for the first time, I found myself crying for Emma Beck. And this put into me, it was this really that enabled me to overcome my disquiet. And I wanted to be there for women like that, to be a friendly presence. I actually had no idea of the Good Counsel Network. I didn't know about people like Isabel. I didn't know anything about that. I just wanted to be there. In fact, I was kind of I had a bit of disquiet about hanging out with pro-life people who stand outside clinics, because I didn't know how wonderful they were then. I had drunk quite deeply of the sort of propaganda, the cultural idea that these are quite judgmental people who are sort of contemptuous of the fallen women, or, you know, some other horrible idea. So it was this point that I became involved. Shortly after I became involved, I was discovered, rumbled by my book club that I'd been involved with for 10 years in Ealing, very lovely book club. And I was rumbled by them, and I was invited to a sort of, it's like a Maoist struggle session, I have to say, to re-educate me. And so prior to this, I went to the Good Counsel Network and I said, listen, I need to know what you do, because I need to explain this to my book club. Am I going too long? Yeah. Okay, thank you. So it was then that I really became very, very well acquainted with the work of the Good Counsel Network and the stack of testimonials that they have. So I began to volunteer outside the clinic at that point, and I met incredible women. I don't have time to tell you the stories of the testimonies of these women whose lives. I met one woman who was being berated by an older gentleman outside the clinic for being judgmental, and she was standing there with her little baby in a buggy. And after he left, I went over to sort of support her, and after he left, she told me her story of how she had prayed that God would send her an angel before she was attending on an abortion that she did not want. She had no options, none whatsoever. She was literally facing destitution. And she said that when she came to the clinic, she saw people praying outside, and for her, that was a sign of goodwill. She didn't see prayer as a sign of judgment. She saw people praying as a sign of goodwill, and that was where she had help. So I started to really understand that some of us, our cultural demographic can sometimes see public prayer differently, but there is a significant population of people who love to see public prayer and don't want to see a secularized space in that way. Lastly, I just want to close very briefly on the impact that this has had on us. So we're a very praying family. We pray all the time. You know, at 12 o'clock, my alarm goes off. We pray the Angelus with the children. At 3 o'clock, we'll pray the Divine Mercy prayers for the dying, wherever they might be. And whenever we hear an ambulance or a police siren, we pray. And so this law has made outlaws out of my children and out of me, and I little imagined that I would ever be teaching my children that the law is to be sort of, that the law is an ass, that the law is in direct conflict with our own conscience, even so much as the law wants to intrude even in our private, the privacy of our own hearts, in our relationship with God. And so it seems extraordinary that for us, and I would say we are the most law-abiding population that you could find. The most law-abiding. We are so so docile and well-behaved, and the law is now making us outlaws, setting its face against us, and it leaves us in this very difficult situation. And not only us, but of course these women, who I think deserve to see a sign of faith in a public space. Not everybody wants to see a public space completely stripped and extinguished of every sign of faith. I think I ought to stop there. Thank you.
Wow, well, that was quite the very, very personal testimony. And Clare, thank you for your efforts and for your courageousness in helping so many women within the area that you live and work. And we wish you well with that. And I suppose it challenges us all to do more even practically. Whilst the legislation is one thing, just to actually step up and really come alongside women who find themselves in these difficult circumstances. So thank you so much. And again, it just highlights the need to mitigate against the damages that Clause 9 will bring about if we can't see change. So I'm going to hand over now to Isabel. Thank you so much for coming. Our thoughts and prayers are very much with you at this time, because I know you're going through the fire, and we want to assure you as a people, you're very much to the fore, and we look forward to hearing your story today. And I know that you do help a lot of women as well, so maybe you can dip into that as well. So over to you.
Thank you very much, and thank you to everyone who's taken the time to listen today. I really appreciate the chance to be heard. So I started doing the work that I do outside abortion centres about 20 years ago. And every week since then, pretty much, I've gone outside the abortion centre to quietly pray and offer help to those who are considering abortion. I must have spoken to thousands of women and couples in very difficult situations. One of the very first times I was there outside the abortion centre, I remember a student, I think she was 18, walking past on the other side of the road, and she just called out to me and said, "What are you doing there?" And I explained to her that I was there just to offer any alternatives or help to anyone who was considering abortion. And she just looked at me and said, "Why weren't you here last week?" She said, "If you'd been here last week, I wouldn't have had my abortion." And that's ultimately why I'm there, and why the people who like me are there. We want to make sure everyone has that real alternative offered to them if that's what they want. So about 11 years ago, I kind of stepped up and started organising the group that I was with, which up till then I'd just been a member of that group. And that meant we started having, quite a strict code of conduct, which we called a statement of peace that everybody had to sign who was coming to join our group. And this is something that I hear, most of the groups that I know around the country would have the same thing. So in this code of conduct, people would sign to say they're going to, agree to behave in a loving, peaceful way. For instance, they wouldn't, they'd sign to say they wouldn't use the word murder or murderer, that they'd only use the leaflets prescribed to them and things. And I assure you, it doesn't take any twisting of wrists to make people sign this. In fact, they're actually quite reassured to know that everyone else who is going to be with them is of the same mindset. So as I say, we just have one leaflet that we use to hand out, which has been checked by a doctor. Any kind of medical information in there has references so people can see where it comes from. We don't actually have any posters as part of our group. We've never had them outside that abortion centre. I'm not saying there's not a room for that, but we've never had any. It's just simply 2 or 3 people standing there quietly praying with a leaflet of help. And as somebody comes past, they would say, would you like a leaflet? If someone says no, or just ignores them, that's the end of the conversation. Contrary to what you might hear, we don't go chasing women down the street or running after them. The leaflet would have details of the help that we can provide. That would be, might be financial help, help with accommodation, childcare, maybe private medical help, sometimes just friendship. But ultimately, we pledge that whatever a woman or couple needs to continue their pregnancy and beyond for as long as they need it, we will provide. And we've always honoured that pledge. Certainly know well over 100 women who've accepted that help, but I don't keep a kind of tally of numbers. Often we actually have a conversation and a woman says, thank you so much. I'm going to have another think. And we don't know the end of the end result. But as I say, there's certainly been well over 100 that I know have definitely continued and accepted the help. And we've seen the end result. And I've had the great honour of and blessing of holding many of these children and staying in contact with many of the mums who've become good friends. Many of these women have actually been into the abortion centre, had their initial appointment, and didn't feel they were provided with any reasonable alternative to abortion. But on coming out of the abortion centre, or maybe when they talk to us, or maybe having had a leaflet, getting home and phoning us, they've realised that there is another option open to them. And also just to add that many of our group are also post-abortive themselves. They've been through abortions. I was just talking to one of our team the other day. The babies she's lost to abortion are in double figures, and that's not uncommon for the women that we speak to. And it wasn't that she didn't know about contraception. It wasn't that she was treating abortion like contraception, but it was that the problems that caused her to come for abortion were never really solved by the abortion. The underlying problems were never treated. So in her situation, she was being abused. She was told to go to the abortion centre, which she dutifully did, and came back home to the same abuser. And this went on and on and on and on because it was never addressed. And again, this isn't uncommon with women that I speak to, that it isn't really their choice at all. That's why the words pro-choice do stick in my throat sometimes. So originally, we prayed outside a Mary Stopes abortion centre in Birmingham, where they did about 10,000 abortions a year. That closed at the end of 2019. And actually, we had a good relationship with many of the staff there. I remember when it was closing, the manageress or the duty manager, she came out and offered a bag of donuts out to us. I remember actually her saying that she was going to look for work in a different area, not abortion. She said she felt quite disillusioned with her work, and that many of the women she was seeing were just repeat abortions. This is what she'd noticed as well. And maybe felt similar to us, that it wasn't really solving problems. So in 2020, we moved to a BPAS centre in Birmingham, the Roberts Clinic, which is where we've been praying up till now. And at first, there were some locals there who did oppose us, I would say, but there were many who were very supportive, came out with cups of tea for us, came and said to us, if you want to come into our house and use our bathroom when you're here, you're welcome, just stop to chat. I've met some really good friends there. But the people there who maybe did have different views to us and did oppose us began doing a campaign of leafleting in the neighbourhood. If I was saying politely, I'd say it just had a lot of misinformation, but I actually felt there was a lot of lies in it. And after that leaflet was shared, I did notice quite a marked change in how people behaved towards us, thinking that maybe we were judging women, whereas before that wasn't what they thought about us, and certainly isn't the case. We certainly don't judge anybody. We did make ourselves available with meetings with police. I mean, even before I ever went to the abortion centre, we'd given all our details to the police and sent copies of our leaflets to the police and things like that. We went to, when I went to a meeting that the police had organised, which I was very pleased to go to, they told me that they'd invited locals, they'd invited staff from the abortion centre, they'd invited counsellors. Nobody turned up except ourselves. We were very willing to discuss any concerns with anybody else, but nobody seemed to want a dialogue with us. And I think there was quite possibly some pressure put on the police by some of the locals to get rid of us. And that's the kind of context and the background into which a PSPO was brought in Birmingham. And a bit like Claire was saying, we've never had any arrests. We've never, prior to this, we've never had any antisocial behaviour that we've happened to brought about by us. Everyone has behaved in an exemplary manner. In the public consultation documents and in the local newspapers at the time, there was again a huge amount of misinformation put out. The things said about my team bore absolutely no resemblance to what went on. In fact, if what had been described really went on, I would want nothing to do with the team that I worked with. I really wouldn't. It was saying things like that we were standing there with megaphones, waving big placards with horrible things written on them, and shouting murderer at women. Of course, we don't have any megaphones. We've never had any posters there, and I wouldn't dream of calling people murderers. As I say, my closest friends there have had multiple abortions. I don't view them as murderers, and nor does anyone in my team. But lies stick, and they stuck very well. You just couldn't meet a lovelier group than the team I work with. I really wish people could meet them without their, preconceptions of what they're like. I mean, just to give you an example, I know a while ago there was a couple that came to the abortion centre, and we handed them a leaflet. Later on, they phoned up. This couple were in a really difficult situation. They'd got into terrible debt. Personally, I think through no fault of their own. It was a very challenging situation. They had a baby, but for that previous pregnancy, the mum had spent the whole of the pregnancy lying on the floor because they couldn't even afford a bed. They were just at their wits' end. You could just see in the dad's eyes that he'd lost all hope. And the mum was really struggling with depression. It was a horrible situation. And the most difficult thing for us, as is quite often the case, was actually convincing them that we really would help them. They'd been pushed from pillar to post, go here, talk to this organisation, fill in these forms, and just nothing was happening. But we said, we really will help you. And I remember I went and met this couple, and I came back and spoke to my team, and I said, look, this couple have got thousands of pounds in debt. They need to have it lifted. This is what this couple need. And remember, we've always pledged to provide whatever anyone needs. By the next day, my team had covered that debt. And these aren't people who were really well off. They'd given money out of their own savings and their own hard-earned money that maybe was difficult to give out, but they wanted to honour that pledge. And as I say, everything that couple needed was provided, and they now have a lovely little boy. And they're just like, their life is just so different. I remember meeting them at Christmas, seeing their lovely family. They just couldn't thank us enough. Yeah, the way I've heard my team described, you think there was some kind of militant group of vigilantes, you really would. But as I say, there's never been any evidence of this. What we're doing is in the public eye all the time. People have phones with them. Why is there no evidence of this? So as you may have heard, in September this year, a PSPO was brought in Birmingham around the abortion centre that we were at. After that, my team prayed outside the PSPO. It was almost impossible to reach the women going in there because we were so far away from it. You could barely even see the abortion centre. We were just standing outside a nearby church. And just to say, those that opposed us still opposed us standing there. We were still regularly sworn at, threatened, spat at, even though we were nowhere near the abortion centre at this point. So that didn't help people who opposed us. They were still just as unhappy with us. So in this sort of atmosphere, 4 times I went into the PSPO zone, and I silently prayed near the abortion centre when it was closed. The last of these times, 3 officers approached me. They asked me if I was protesting. I made it clear I wasn't protesting. They asked me if I was praying, and I said I might be silently praying in my head, but I've said nothing out loud to anybody. They arrested me. They gave me a very thorough search on the pavement. They then took me to the police station, locked me in a cell for hours, and then interviewed me or interrogated me, however you'd like to see it. They quizzed me as to what was going on in my head. For the people who say I wasn't arrested for prayer, why were they so interested in my prayer when I was being interviewed in the police station? I even repeated it back to them. I said, "Do you want to know what I was praying about?" And they said, yes. They released me on bail, and then I was recalled and charged on 4 counts of protest and engaging in an act which is intimidating of service users. And I remind you that the abortion centre was closed when I was there, so I leave it to you to work out how I was intimidating any service users. And I'm due to appear in court on the 2nd of February. So the concerns that I have, and as many of us have, are far wider than the abortion debate or even the free speech debate. The most basic rights, my right to think privately in my own head what I want to think, wherever I am. This is what's being infringed on. And my concern is if national buffer zones come in, then the repercussions are going to be, you know, the most basic freedoms that we have are going to be censored. Is people's thoughts all around the country going to be censored because that's what our silent prayers are? Or are we going to see mass arrests of people like myself who've never even had so much as points on my license up until now? And ultimately, I think the most thing that I'm concerned about is the women that we've been supporting for many years. They're not going to be able to have these alternatives provided to them because it doesn't work when I'm in the next street. You know, women don't go wandering around the neighborhood to see if they can happen to see somebody else who can help them. And I just want to end by sharing something that a woman has sent me and given me permission to share. She sent me a text a while ago and she said, "Good evening, Isabel. I have no words that can explain what you have done for us. As a family, we were falling apart, literally at despair, broken. We had run out of options and ideas of how to survive. Then you came along, and you have quite literally given us so much more than we could ever have hoped or wished for. You are so lovely and kind, and I just can't thank you enough from the bottom of my heart. I'm so truly grateful we met with you that day last week. Thank you so very much. I hope one day to be able to make a difference to someone the same way you have for us. Thank you a million times over." And that was from one of the lovely mums that we have support. And I hope we can continue to support, but obviously we can only do that without buffer zones and PSPOs interfering. So thank you very much for your time.
Well, that was extremely powerful and very actually just humbling and quite emotional actually to hear just how you have the amount that you have put on the line to help women who find themselves in a difficult situation and the price that you're paying, but you do it all out of love and out of compassion and out of a desire to help ladies choose life, which is absolutely amazing. And again, I just can't relay to you enough that we do stand with you and that we want to assure you of our thoughts and our prayers and our support in the coming weeks, because we know that it will be difficult for you and your family. So we will continue to very much think on those things, and you've certainly given us lots of points that we need to take away and work on.